Hello and welcome to the Powerhouse Leaders podcast. I'm your host, Stephana Johnson, and I have a very special guest today with me, Mark Turrell. He is a strategist, educator, and entrepreneur, and he works at the intersection of business, technology, and society. He combines collective intelligence with AI, with networks, complex systems, behavioral science, as well as neuroscience. And he is the founder of Orcasci. So that is, as he explained it, and I hope he'll talk a little bit about Orcasci with us today. He is an expert at scaling. In fact, he is the author of an outstanding book called Scaling. It's one of the reasons I reached out to him. And that's what I want to talk about today. So we're going to get right to it. And he'll give us some more of the insight. In fact, some of the awards that he's been nominated for as a technology pioneer. He has also been a young global leader, and he's got some great insight that I cannot wait to share with you. So I will turn it over to Mark, and let's do this. So Mark, first of all, I want to know what led you to scaling. Yeah, go for it.
So I was actually, before I got to scaling, I got to spread, because I've been in my first company, Imaginatik. We were working with a lot of major corporations doing innovation programs: Coca-Cola, Pfizer, Merck, Allianz, Boeing, you name it. We were working with them to design their programs, and it was designing it from a consulting perspective, and then it was actually building the software in place. And our key differentiators, we were tapping into the brain power of the masses, either their employees, but also their customers, their staff, and the general public, to solve problems. What became really interesting for me, though, is that some companies did much better out of this innovation stuff than others. And very often they'd follow the same process. They would have also use the same tools. And quite often they would even have the same ideas. So I became fascinated by what made some people better than others. And a lot of it went down into how immersed or engaged executives were, because that allowed them to put funding in. But what it got me very much into is this idea about how do ideas spread. And spread itself for me was just a fascinating subject. Like, why do some things spread and other things don't? Well, I was then beginning to draft a book on spread, so complex systems, networks, all of these good things. And I was approached by a guy called Menno Van Dijk, who was a former partner at McKinsey, and he's one of the co-founders of the Think School of Creative Leadership in Amsterdam. And he really liked my ideas on spread, and he said, well, that's actually kind of close to scaling. And I said, well, tell me, what do you think? And what Think had done is they'd taken pretty much IDEO and other work around design thinking, and they created almost like an MBA for creatives. What was missing, they realized, with design thinking is that you would be able to design really nice initiatives, but how do you get them to scale? So on the one hand, there was, okay, once you've designed a thing, how do you make it scale? And this gives you growth hacking in a number of different areas. But the thing is, they had my extra insight was, well, why don't you design it to scale in the first place? Because some things scale by accident, but things can be done on purpose. So I then took, for me, scaling is then a subset of spread, which is a bigger thing. But it means very specifically, how do you get a very big result by doing almost nothing? And that's then, I spent 6 months working to write the first version of the book, the second edition of the book, and that came out. And now that's been used in a number of universities around the world and to help startups, big companies, and different things. But yeah, that's how I got to scaling.
Yeah, that's okay. As you're speaking, I'm so excited about this concept because, I mean, quite frankly, we can't look at we can't not look at the elephant in the room, which is what's happening right now, the spread of right?
Oh, and we, as a practitioner, I think the virus has done an awesome job. Sadly, it's really clever. I mean, it's collectively clever, even though it's not intelligent in the slightest.
Yeah, for sure. But we can also look at the ripple effect of other things that are spreading as a result. You know, I mean, whether it's economy, whether it's fear, whether it's, you know, it's so interesting because I remember watching you on a talk where you talked about the 50 Shades of Grey and how it spread. And this became like this,
Yep.
oh my gosh. And that's the first time I heard about the book, actually. So I thought, that's interesting. But as looking at this concept and really making the impact, because this is one of the things that I love about what you say. And I want to get what your favorite quote is. My favorite quote of yours is, we have a limited amount of time on the planet, so let's do big, good things that help others. And what's your favorite quote? Clearly that's, I think that's your driving force, the quote that I just said. But do you have a favorite quote or a mantra that moves you?
Thank you. Very interesting. So I've done a lot of work on these mantras and things. So partially that's because in order to change a system at scale, you sort of need to change the programming rules that individuals have and that groups have and organizations have. So like the 10 commandments was whatever, stop stealing stuff, stop having sex with the next door neighbor's wife, and stop killing people. I mean, how hard can it be? Those were mantras.
Yeah.
So what I've done is that I've looked both for myself and then I've looked at societal and organization some people call them mantras, some people call them rules. And I used the book from Gert Geitzinger called Gut Feelings. That was the first book that really got me into this whole notion of rules and heuristics. So I've got a number of things. One of the things is, it just is. It
Nice.
just is.
Yeah.
So it's really simple. You can't really go wrong with it. It's a way of looking at the world, and if something bad happens, it just is. So part of this stuff is a way of how do you balance yourself and your mind. And it's quite interesting. If you're going to do really big things, it's quite good to know yourself. And then once you know yourself, then you can push yourself beyond yourself. Because even if you think you know yourself, you only really know it when you go beyond your boundaries and realize you screw up. In that case, you pull back a little bit. But if you keep going beyond your boundaries and it isn't a boundary, then you just keep getting bigger and bigger, not physically bigger, but just let's say sort of mentally bigger, and your capacity to do things is bigger. And I do have other ones. I'm an idiot, one of my favorites. Well, the thing is, it's quite good to have a level of balance, and a lot of people get very excited by their own ego. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I've done things that took me an hour that I know for many people would be 20 years of their life on stage talking about one little story. It only took me an hour. So it was a thing. It just took an hour. The way of being an idiot is a balancing fact, because I'm an idiot. I mean, I will forget at least 2 coffee cups today. At home, they have to say, well, like who's that? Well, obviously, it's mine, I think. Is that yesterday? So, but it's a way of balancing. I like one that is a scaling thing, which I like, which is focus on the end goal. And it goes very much into, like, what is it that you really want? What is it that is needed? Because many people get very distracted and they think they have an end goal, but it's not. Or they get stuck on a thing that is a middle thing and not actually the thing that you really want. So focus on the end goal. So I've a whole set of these things. The other one is that it's very sad, and I've lived many, many years in America, so I know it well. The thing about America is very important. There are 3 things that are important about America and Americans. So the first thing is that there are 3 things that are important, and you repeat that twice. Unfortunate, but no. All of the good things, really, like the tricky, so what I've actually been looking at, particularly if you look at sort of scaling systems, is then how do you find the least number of rules that work in the vast majority of cases to get really cool stuff done at scale effortlessly. And I mean, I do have 3 rules that I use mostly, which is focus on the end goal, it's all easy, and be lazy.
That's kind of like the power of doing nothing. Do less and have more, right? As opposed to how a lot of Americans are constantly do. So it's interesting that you're giving that juxtaposition of these concepts.
Well, and mostly because, I mean, the do. Why they do? It's because Americans have been taught to be dramatically jealous of other people.
Really?
We must envy their products because we need to buy those products. We therefore have to work our asses off. We probably need to borrow money. I mean, the average American household is $8,600 worth of debt.
Yeah.
And that's just, sorry, credit card debt. I'm not talking about school, medical debt, house, and car.
Yeah. Yeah.
So Americans are all living, 5 years to 10 years into the future. And there's this sort of pervasiveness of persuasion. I mean, I teach a course on persuasion, but everybody is persuaded to be jealous of everybody else. The way of achieving sort of happiness is to buy more stuff. And the way of buying more stuff is to buy it on credit. Then that means you have to work like crazy.
Yeah, I mean,
and then nobody's happy anyway. Well, weird. I'm not saying nobody, but many people are not happy.
I completely hear you, and you're kind of preaching to the choir here, because this is, as powerhouse leaders, I'm an advocate of taking back our power from the inside out, and that's, of course, why I wanted to bring you on. So I'm hearing some interesting pieces that is giving me a little bit different insight, and I might take you up on this if you have a few more minutes after this.
Sure,
but I
absolutely.
want to respect your time. Okay.
I am all yours and your listeners as well.
Fantastic. Okay.
Yeah, but you first, because I don't know who your listeners are, but I know you.
So a crucial early mistake. I'd love to get your insight on a crucial early mistake. I mean, you have an amazing attitude of having a sense of humor and not taking yourself so seriously, which I think is very healthy for leaders generally, and for up and coming leaders. We just, what you just said, while we have this concept of pleasing everybody or the envy piece, I love what you said around knowing yourself so that you can do better and be better and articulate changes when you come up with a challenge in a healthy way. So there's a lot of things that you've said. I'll have to replay this and kind of distill some of these pieces, but knowing what you're saying, because you're coming from this perspective of you know a lot of things, and can see it in hindsight. What was a crucial mistake early on that you made that allowed for you to see that, to be able
Hundreds.
To separate?
I mean, I'm a product of I'm a product of my mistakes, and fortunately, I became successful. But I remember early on, when I was in my very early 20s, I was doing a project for a big FMCG company in Europe. And I realized that I underpriced my presentation. So I did a presentation, a workshop. I was doing my PhD at the time as well. And it took me, let's say, 3 times more time. So I went to the guy that hired me. I'd already done the work. And I said, look, I'm about to send you the invoice. I've realized that I mispriced it. And I really should have charged you, instead of whatever, 3,000, I should have charged you 9,000 for it. I'm happy to do it at a little bit less than that, but is that okay? He said, well, I'll tell you what. You can come up with what you think is a fair invoice and we will pay it. But if you do that, you will never work in our company ever again. So I said, I don't believe you. And then I never worked for that company ever again. So that was an interesting mistake that I learned then.
So what was the mistake, though? Was it that you underpriced, or was it that you, based on what he said, that you went ahead and did it?
So now this becomes fascinating, is that, and what's the big lesson to learn that I learned very early on is that many people have learning experiences, but you only have a learning experience honestly if you plan to learn. Most people experience, and then post-fact they think they learned something, but maybe they learned the wrong thing. So in this case then, maybe I learned price better. Another way is that relationships are important. Another thing is that sometimes you should sacrifice profit on one project because it'll help you get into other projects. You end up with, even now, one thing I'm playing with quite a lot, doing a lot of community work, so networks of people, is redemption as a power. So somebody does something bad. However, you can give them you can give them redemption. And then they kind of behave much, much better and become your supporter.
You give them redemption so that they can make up the damage? So essentially you're assisting them in learning, having a crucial lesson?
Well, the thing is, I could try to assist them in learning, but many people aren't ready to learn and aren't learning. many people also, they do the head nod. Or they just go, yeah, totally get it. And they don't get it in the slightest. I mean, I know I can read people extremely well, really, really well. And I don't turn it on that often because it can get very intense. It's just like whatever, you're in the Ocean's 13 movie and you see whatever numbers over people's head. Take it down.
Right. Yeah.
And most people just can't do it anyway. They can bang. So many people are on, let's say, very trivial versions of understanding themselves. Mm-hmm. So to give them an advanced thing is pointless. Mm. So it's good to have a level of understanding, whether you're a leader or a follower or just a sort of a normal human. Start easy, and then you can always upgrade it if you are successful at a few easy steps. But these are it was moments like this that basically caused me to reflect. I mean, because also, remember, I didn't know at the time. So if you think it through, at the time, it looked as though I was successful. Now it meant that I, let's say, didn't triple my revenue, but I doubled my revenue doing a project that I'd already done. All I had to do was send off an invoice. So plausibly, from the outside, what I did at the beginning was the right thing to do. However, you then realize that nobody in the company will talk to you. And instead of doing 50 times the same project, you've done 0. And then you find out that people move companies and they remember when they go over there as well.
So interesting.
So like it's a little bit more time to understand, let's say, the implications of these things. You can't always learn immediately.
Yeah, for sure. Well, it's also makes me think of perspective, because you have different perspectives that you could take that lesson. You could look at your own personal integrity. So what's your hierarchy of personal integrity? It seems to me, so you've learned quite a bit, but relationships overall, in hindsight, what is the ultimate thing? And it sounds to me like you discovered that relationships are something that's vital, important to you, and you value relationships more than you've maybe valued the bottom line or something.
Actually, not really, because at the same time I had people trying to say, let's do a business relationship, surely you should work with others. And I realized, well, not with you. Because these particular people have the wrong skills or anything else. Okay, well, so the thing is, I mean, again, this is like, sure, we could try to simplify it. Yeah. But this is one of the reasons that people don't succeed, is because they make it so simple that it's nonsense.
Yeah, interesting. And for sure. No, and as I'm listening to you, I'm like really trying to understand so that I can have a conversation with you. So I'm understanding it within my own framework, and then I'm articulating it back to you, and clearly it's like not it. but I'm hearing what you're saying, and what I like about this for listeners, for myself as well as anyone who listens to this, is that it's not all one size fits all, and we don't have to all fit into certain things. And I'll take it back to this piece that you said with regards to knowing yourself. And ultimately, at the end of the day, that's all we've got, is to know yourself and to not take yourself so seriously that,
Possibly. I mean, I've been looking at this thing. It actually is completely fine that people don't know themselves at all. That's completely fine. I know most people don't. So, and we're still able to build space rockets. We're still able to create governments. We're still able to create businesses. You don't have to know yourself.
Well, interesting.
It's totally fine.
So you're right. But I think if we don't know ourselves, we get into this trap of what you considered Americans being in, which is the ego, looking outside of ourselves and comparing to some fabricated idea of what they think we should be. I should be. So I need to go buy this because I'm not this. But if you knew yourself, you'd be like, hey, that doesn't actually make me happy. That's some other concept that's fabricated. Do you know what I mean? Anyway, I would love to get your advice for up and coming leaders, and and I'll say know thyself, but let's not use that one, since that's. Yeah. So any advice for up and coming leaders?
What do you have? The one, and it's particularly if you look at the time. So this is being recorded now in April, after the longest month ever.
Yeah.
So this is being recorded at the beginning of April 2020. We will have an extremely uncertain 5 years. Now, this is really important if you're a leader, because right now, so let's say you were a leader before in an old model of doing things, and you think that your next iteration of yourself is basically going to be the same, but a slightly bigger car. Well, maybe. The thing is that if you look at right now, I mean, we're having this chat. You're in Portland, I'm in Berlin. This is my office. This is your office. Your plant looks a little bit dead. No, it's not dead. It's
one flower left. I don't want to trim her off yet.
Yeah, I can tell. But right now, you're finding that whatever companies around the world are doing more and more virtual work. There are many leaders that are only comfortable if they can see people in the office. Well, it may be that there are leadership skills that, let's say, some people got really good at, but these are just going to be useless skills for the next 2 or 3 years. Because by and large, as this virus doesn't disappear, I mean, I actually like, as a piece of framework, so I like to think of the virus, the economy, and then there's the virus plus the economy as a third thing. Because, and the reason why it's a third thing is that as soon as the economy looks as though it'll start to get bubbling again, the virus will come back. And as soon as the virus comes back, the economy goes down. So this sort of combination, it makes it really tricky until we have some form of immunity. So it means that you shouldn't be relying on the skills that you had beforehand. I think as leaders now, you need to become comfortable in the virtual domain. This means that you need to understand, let's say, how do Zoom calls work, Skype calls work? How do you work collaboratively in whatever, a Google document instead of emailing around Word documents? How do you use Slack, these virtual tools? It becomes very important to know how to use these tools. But also there's the human side as well. How do you have an esprit de corps? How do you have camaraderie? How do you have sort of fun? How do you make it interesting to work? How do you handle things like trust of the people that you work for and the people that you work with? And it means that we'll end up getting much more down to being accountable for deliverables that can be, let's say, measured as the wrong, but you can see. So this would be the kind of thing that let's imagine that you say, well, we said we're going to have a call today. It started today. You said you'll do this. You do this. That's a deliverable. I think in many of the corporate contexts you might have, and even startups can sometimes have this problem that people live on these sort of fuzzy, furry promises. But where's the concreteness? So yes, I've just met this company. He said he's super, super excited by what we have to offer. Brilliant. So where's the document that says he's super excited? No, he just told me that. Okay, well, but like, who told you that? I think this is, we're going to be looking at in this type of leadership, how do you get more accountability? The other one is, how do you handle stress? And so I exited my company in 2010, my Imaginatik, the one that I took public. I would hate to be running it right now. Because if I had 40 employees, I'd probably cut 25 of them, because I'd have to preserve cash. I would know already surviving the 2008 recession, I had 3 of my biggest customers go bankrupt. So that carves out 20% of your revenue just like that. And it's unbelievably stressful running a company in good times, let alone the hard times. So I think working out how leaders can individually handle stress, it makes sense in a company perspective to bottle it up some way. One of the mistakes that I had is all of my friends worked for me. Or at least I didn't have any friends. I just had employees that I used to pay because this was all that I was doing. But making sure that you have some way of handling stress will be important because, and then this final piece of advice is just understanding uncertainty. Getting used to the fact that you do not know what's going on next month. And I think there's it's a part of knowing yourself and let's say handling this thing is there's a little exercise of assumption development. So what you do is you take an event that might take place in a week or two. So let's say I think that Portland will be out of lockdown in 2 weeks' time. And you just make your bets. You then say, I believe it'll be out in 2 weeks' time because of this, and you write down all the reasons. And then what you do is you wait for the 2 weeks and you see if you're right. what I found, and actually I call this the Donald Trump test. So particularly as I was playing around with this in 2016, so when I asked people when did they think Trump would be president, many people still don't believe it now. Well, clearly they were wrong. That means that their assumptions that led them to make that judgment that they had were also wrong. However, people don't appreciate that they have a mental model, they have a set of assumptions in their head, which means they never try to improve them because they don't know they have them in the first place. So this is, let's say, a useful piece of practical introspection for leaders now, is to work out what are your underlying assumptions and are they right? Because that'll mean that you can be much more responsive to market demands, market pressures, or anything else, and you can begin to become much more successful in adapting to the situations and taking advantage of the opportunities as they absolutely will arise. But it's good if you are prepared.
Awesome. It's actually excellent advice. And I wonder if you would share with us then your top stress buster or how you handle stress. Maybe you've already shared a little bit about how you do that.
Well, actually, it just is. But part of the thing is that my parents divorced when I was 7. And both my parents, it was a bit of a messy divorce. Both my parents wanted to treat me like an adult, but I did not want to be treated like an adult because I was 7, 8, and 9 years old. So what I did was I created a box in my head for bad things. Anything I didn't want to listen to, I would let the words go in, open the box, put it into the box, close the box. I would then, at a time of my choosing, open the box because it would be very bad to have a box full of monsters. So I'd always be able to see the things inside there, and then I close the box again because I controlled my reality. Well, it just is as a way of controlling reality, and it's a way of somehow, let's say, and this is why the term mantra isn't even a bad term. It's just a way of, let's say, resetting yourself, going back to what you know it's here. And it's fine. It just is. You take a little deep breath. And now, I've gone through some pretty, let's say, tremendously, really, 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 really tough things. But these are the type of logics that I've had. I mean, for my leadership logics that I've had focus on the end goal, be honest, and leaders lead. Because this is the other thing as well, I think, particularly in times like this, is that it's very easy to basically not lead. You're panicked, you're stressed, you don't know what to do, and you don't do anything. Mm-hmm. But that's still leading. It's leading by doing nothing and making people confused. That's still a leader. And what I found is that the obligation of leading, whether it's a team or a company or an agency or a country, you still have to lead. Now, you could be a terrible leader or a great leader. You're still the leader. And you could do something or you could do nothing. And the something could work or it could be terrible, but you're the leader. So yeah, focus on the end goal. What is it that you want? And then the be honest, it's just another one. It's not helpful to make stuff up, as we can tell.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. We could go on. I mean, there's so many different, I'd like to chase a couple of different things, but I'm going to respect your time. And just, if you don't mind sharing just a little bit about what you did in, I think it was Zimbabwe, where you, there was a significant role that you played for the citizens. And can you share a little bit about that and what made you go after that? And do you know what I'm talking about?
My 45-minute coffee chat at the World Economic Forum Davos in 2008 that changed the country.
Yeah.
So I came up with, I decided towards the end of 2007 that I exist to change the entire world for better, all of it at the same time, ideally without anybody knowing that it's me. I decided that I would change 40 million people's lives for the better, directly or indirectly, in the first 4 years, to work out if I was crazy or not. And I then spent 6 weeks inventing a plan to change the world, and I came up with a plan to change the world. When I went to Davos World Economic Forum, 2,500 executives, it was my very first time there as an invited delegate. I just didn't want to be there trying to sell $1 million pieces of software. I just thought that would be boring. So I then was doing half my time pitching, I have a plan to change the world. Do you need any help? And half my time trying to sell software. Well, The final conversation I had, I did agree with my board of directors that I would stop trying to change the world. The final conversation that I had was with a guy from Zimbabwe. So he said, look, if you want to change the world and your background is collective intelligence, crowdsourcing the power of the masses, we have a problem in Zimbabwe. Tell me more. So he said that he was the deputy leader of the opposition party of Zimbabwe, the MDC. They were going to fight an election in 5 weeks' time. Now, they knew that they would win the election. However, it's a corrupt democracy and the election was guaranteed to be stolen. So what he wanted to have was a fair count of the vote. And he thought, with my background of crowdsourcing, I mean, that was the reason why I was nominated a technology pioneer, could we use some kind of crowdsourcing thing to help change Zimbabwe? But he said, look, before you say yes, you want to help, the constraints are there's only 5 weeks to go, so there's no time. The budget for this project is zero, so there is no money whatsoever. And if this isn't hard enough, if anybody finds out what's going on, including his boss, Morgan Tsvangirai, the leader of the opposition, everybody is likely to be murdered. Well, I said, well, I have some constraints of my own. I know nothing about Zimbabwe whatsoever. Like, nothing. I'm kind of down there, but nothing. I also know nothing about elections. And at that time, I'd only had 2 hours of sleep because I was out partying and dancing until 4 o'clock in the morning, and I woke up at 6. So I said, however, you seem to be desperate. I think I can fix anything. Let's find out if I'm just full of shit. So I use the rules, focus on the end goal, be lazy, and it's all easy, which is another rule that I have because it's a way of just framing the world. So I invented for him crowdsourced election monitoring. It turns out the way you win a stolen election is the cheapest way possible with the least amount of risk. In the case of Zimbabwe, you buy off the election officials. But that meant that because you spend money buying the end result, you don't cheat at the ground level. You don't cheat in the polling stations because there's no need, because it's too expensive. So that meant that the vote itself was honest. The vote was people honestly voted, their votes were honestly tallied, and then there was a moment of transparency, which is when the result, Morgan Tsvangirai, 8,000 votes, other guy, 2,000 votes, was published on 9,000 polling stations. So my idea, using technology, was to be everywhere at the same time. I want to see every result instantly. Again, my background is crowdsourcing. So this meant that I needed 1,000 people with camera phones to stand outside the biggest polling stations so that when the polls closed and the results were tallied, they would get a text message, say, take a picture of the result table and send it to this website that just happened to be where there were 10 students in an office in Johannesburg turning the pictures into a big spreadsheet. To get the 1,000 people took 30 minutes. Now, at this point, most people, when they do strategy work, think that everything is going to be nice. Well, the responsibility of coming up with the band plan for this is that my ideas could have killed 300 or 400 people. That would have been bad. Not a good thing, a bad thing. So I then thought, well, let's imagine that I'm the bad guy. I would definitely have spies in the political parties of the opposition. That's fairly easy to do. So we now need to decide if we're going to get 1,000 people, should we have our most trusted people, or should we assume that there's a spy and assume that, in fact, everybody's a spy? So instead of building a system built on trust, I did the opposite. It's one of my thinking methods that I use, quite successful, just opposite thinking. And instead of trusting everybody, we said we wouldn't trust anybody. Well, to do that, we did what's called a network hijack. So this is in the scaling book. So the opposition had 15,000 supporters. He, who was the deputy leader, sent a trusted message out to all of the people doing what's called network activation, another piece of the scaling book as well. Those people were told, we're doing a project, but I can't tell you what it is. You could be a spy. All I need to know is, do you have a camera phone and will you help? And 1,000 people said yes, including all the spies. But they don't know what they've said yes to because we didn't tell them. On the day of the election, they were told, bring your camera phone. Then they were told, take a picture. Everybody took pictures because even the spies had to take pictures because if they didn't take a picture, they would have been a spy. So that meant that we were pretty much everywhere across the whole of Zimbabwe. After we did the count, remember, we didn't train anybody because the sort of kids in whatever, the students just looked at a handwritten note and turned the numbers into a spreadsheet. After about 3 hours of counting the vote, remember, without money, without anybody know that it was happening, we'd counted over 1/3 of all possible votes in the country and could prove that the opposition was winning by 66% And mathematically alone, Robert Mugabe, the bad guy, couldn't win the election. And sure enough, when the election result finally came out, the bad guy lost by 50.4%. And that meant that 45 minutes of a chat with this guy at 10 o'clock in the morning in Davos on the day one of my 25-year plan changed the outcome of a country of 13 million people. Ta-da!
Yeah. The power of simplicity right there.
Well, I mean, but remember, you only have simplicity when you have all of the other things as well. Because what I would hate for people to misunderstand is, oh, I need a simple plan. Okay.
Yeah, no, I don't mean it as a simple plan. It's the power of you didn't complicate things. You took what was there. You took okay, this is what we've got. Reverse engineered, yeah?
It was a very, very simple plan. And that was because if you work within the constraints that you have, this is one of the interesting things. I mean, it's absolute pure genius, but it's the only way that it could have been done. It couldn't have been done anywhere.
And no convoluted, let's manipulate this or whatever. It was just like straightforward. You know how on the other side, the far side of complexity is simplicity. It's like that to me, as you were describing all of this, it's just like you strung it out so pure simplicity of no, we're going to stick with the truth. Let's look at this. And it's almost like turning on the light and being able to see the whole picture of like, oh, okay, this is what we can do. Because you didn't need to do manipulation. You didn't need to do other things. They were buying out and doing underhanded things. It's like, no, we're just going to shed some light on it. Just the truth. That's all we need to do. It wasn't underhanded at all.
Completely. And so the thing is that because the focus was on the end goal.
Yeah.
So what you find is that many people think that life is complicated. It's not. It's complex. And all the complex systems is you have lots of different agents or people beetling around, giving off signals, picking up signals. So if you smile, I smile because it's signal giving. Well, there are systems made of systems connected to systems. You can have a thing that hops into a thing, but understanding a complex system, and if you had, let's say, a spare 2 weeks or 4 weeks of doing nothing, it's quite handy to learn complex systems in this time because it gives you a different framework to see the world.
Yeah.
And what I realized that I just see the world differently. And when I was looking at this, I mean, I'm sort of drafting a potential book called The New Lens. Just how do you see the world differently? Be a very interesting book. But it took me 45 minutes to change the outcome of a country, and I didn't know where it was. But it's not magic.
But you had the pertinent data.
I had no data.
Well, you didn't need to know where Zimbabwe was, nor did you even need to actually physically be there, because you didn't actually go there and take the pictures yourself, did you?
I spent 45 minutes chatting with the guy in Switzerland, and that was it.
Yeah. So
I didn't do anything else apart from that. I gave him the plan, and I told him, do not even tell me that you're implementing the plan. Because, first of all, I mean, it's your plan, it's not mine. You might not implement it. The other is that his email would definitely have been watched by these security services. Every single person that he contacts is a risk. So just don't tell me anything.
Yeah.
I don't want to know. Go into your own stuff.
Pretty awesome that they did follow through with it, though. I mean, anyway, yeah.
Well, and he made a mistake. And also, I mean, so the bad guy was still there. And the primary reason is that my friend, now he became the deputy prime minister of Zimbabwe, so it kind of worked. The thing is that he told me that we needed to hit a 50% threshold. It turns out there was a 50% threshold, but if you got to 55%, you'd win the presidency outright. Because he didn't tell me the 55% threshold, I didn't design it for 55%. It was designed for 50%.
Missing data.
Well, it's the end goal.
Yeah.
The issue is, in that case, I would say it was the wrong end goal.
Okay.
But I that was my first project.
Yeah.
That's not bad.
No,
now I'm in year 12.
I was impressed by
Everything
it.
gets bigger and bigger now.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay, there was something I wrote down that I wanted to follow up with you on. Okay, so many things. I'm going to let you go because I don't want to take up too much more time on this, and the podcast is supposed to be set at 30, so people will actually listen to it. But I think that you have some incredible insight, and to tell you the truth, I'd really like to know. Maybe we'll leave it for another time, but on this idea of spread, because, in America and worldwide now, we've got a month into quarantine, and we've got enormous. I don't follow so much of the mainstream media, just enough to hear what's going on, and then I try to manage my sources of information so that I can make decisions that are best for me and my family, right? But as far as spread goes, because I'm curious as what your take is on the spread of underlying things as far as complexity. So you mentioned it's not complexity, but things like the humans we're not complex, but there is a complexity to things. Yes? Mm-hmm. Well, so if we unravel this and unpack this whole thing a little bit, maybe you could, what's complexity but unknowns? If you know something, it makes it less complex. And right now, there's so much complexity to this whole, like you said it, you've got COVID, and then you've got the economy, and then you've got COVID and the economy. So if we could unravel a little bit of this, maybe you could shed some light on even compartmentalizing it and putting it in that box, and so that we can look at it. And I talk about this as far as being exterior. We're not our minds. We're not our bodies. We can get exterior and separate from those thoughts, from those emotions, so that we can act. Act in a healthy way. I don't mean go off and dramatize, but take actions, lead, do what we need to do, which is make a decision and lead. So can you unpack this a little bit and give us a little bit on that? As far as the spread and the complexity.
Well, yeah, so one of the challenges is that we use the same words, but we quite often mean different things when we use the same words. So this is it makes it tricky, because everybody can be like nodding their heads in violent agreement, and everybody is agreeing with a completely different thing. So for me, I do not, for example, associate uncertainty with complexity. Now, that's primarily because I like using the term a complex system. And a system is complex as soon as there's an agent or an element. So you and I are elements in a complex system, and we are interacting. So interacting means we give off signals, pick up signals, and decide what to do based on the signal. And there's a progression over time. And that's basically it. So as soon as you have that, you have something that becomes a complex system. But we're a system made of systems. So right now, if more people go into Skype all of a sudden and the video quality goes down and the line breaks, well, that's another system intersecting with our system. Or if all of a sudden there's like, and a piano drops on my head, another system. More likely to be a squirrel, actually. So intersection of systems. So what it means is that, uncertainty is a given, so that's not unfortunately, you don't really get any prizes for saying things are uncertain. What is interesting, though, is that I did some work on signaling within a complex system. So can you know the future? Because I was fascinated. I was reading a history of World War I. And I found that the British intelligence services put spies into Belgium. So Belgium was neutral, but it was controlled by the Germans. But the Kaiser's troops, they would send trains through to the front in France. And what would happen is that the British spies realized quite quickly that if you counted the wagons and counted the type of wagons, as soon as there were troop wagons, you'd know in 3 days there would be an attack. Why? Because if you move 100,000 troops by train, in 3 days there's going to be an attack. It can't be today because they've just arrived. It can't be tomorrow because they have to get settled. It can't be in 5 days because it's too late unless it's raining. So then there were no surprise attacks because they just counted the trains. Now, the reason why, so I have a fashion photography studio in Los Angeles that I helped set up, part of my plan to change the world, called the Dream Factory LA. And we could work out who was going to be 40 feet high on a billboard about 4 months before it happened, because we were friends with the bookers at the modeling agencies. Because now we know, okay, we're looking for a new face. This person has come in from Romania and Ukraine. Can we book the studio for a guest shoot? Okay. Now we know who it's going to be. So the thing then is that whilst people are throwing up their hands saying that things are uncertain, mostly it's because they don't understand the word uncertainty. And because they don't have a framework to see things, it basically, from them, it's just like a fuzzy, catastrophic mess. I've got a different lens. I've got a microscope. So this is a story that I really like. So 350 years ago, there was a crazy Dutch dude called Anton Van Leeuwenhoek. He was nuts. So well, he wasn't really nuts, but he had written scientific papers about how he saw small things moving around in water. And clearly, this is twig, but we can't see things in water. It turns out that when finally scientists visited him at his laboratory in Delft, they discovered that he had invented the microscope. The small things had always been there, but humans didn't have the eyes to see them. His specialty was grinding glass, so to make it really, really fine. His father had a textile business, and he needed to see really, really fine stuff. And he became really, really good at grinding glass. And then not only that, but he would then sell the 100x magnification things to other scientists, and he'd make a 200x for himself. So he always saw more than other people. Why? Because he had a microscope. So when I became fascinated, when I began down this sort of journey, and scaling becomes a piece of this and spreading all these things, is how do I build a microscope to see the world, or a macroscope? And so to understand this, then, I've been playing games about, let's say, what's going to happen next, whether it's politics, virus, everything else. And I like to find out, by improving my assumptions, am I right or wrong? So what it means then is that I think that, it's definitely a book that needs to be written, podcast series that need to be made, because otherwise people don't have a clue how to handle it. Now, given that they don't know themselves, they don't have a clue what's going on, and they just want to do what they did yesterday, good luck to people. You can almost see why they would rather sort of fall into consumerism and just get people to deliver food to their home. It's so much easier. But, to actually understand how things work, so and understanding, in the scaling book, the first 40 pages pretty much goes through a conceptual framework to how to see the world. It only does it in 40 pages rather than 400, but it's not a bad start. Once you have not a bad start, it's then beginning to develop your own, let's say, capabilities of, let's say, seeing. And a lot of it, you can learn a lot by coming up with something you can observe in the next hour or week, writing down your assumptions and seeing if you're right or wrong, and then making an actual attempt to get better at it. Because then this will allow you to see that some things you believe are uncertain, but they're not uncertain in the slightest. As soon as Corona hit China, I was watching it come, there had to be a stock market crash of about 20% at least. Because if the chosen way of stopping the virus is closing down all economic activity and social activity, including bars, restaurants, factories, there's no economic activity. And if there's no economic activity, in Germany, people working at 50% rate per month takes out 4% of GDP. So therefore, if nobody works for 3 months, you have to take out 10% of GDP.
Right.
Now, also based on that, the stock market should be down 50 to 60% from its peak. Why? Because there's no business, there's no revenue. But you can see these things are going to happen. Now, what's quite interesting then is that if you can, it's very, one of the reasons why I like this, it'd be really handy to know the future. Useful. It's just like one of the reasons why Anton Van Leeuwenhoek had a microscope is that the Dutch had a naval fleet and they had a merchant fleet. And it was very handy for them to see at distances. So already in Delft, they invented the telescope to see far. Because if you can see when the pirates are coming, you can change direction. Mm-hmm. Well, other way around is you see small, and then you can see what's really going on. But it's an uncommon skill set. But you can also see, I don't get excitement by selling yogurt. I don't think, yippee, another e-commerce company selling bandanas and shit. So this is why you started off with this quote about, well, if we can, do big things.
Yeah, so you've said so much here, and it's interesting. My mind is actually going shifting in this because I'm a possibility thinker. I am definitely a positive, even Pollyanna, and I want to think the best of things. I want to think only the best. Oh, let's focus on the positive. Let's focus on the best. But this idea of assumption thinking and being okay to assume the worst, assume that everyone's a bad guy, assume that everyone is the enemy, without shifting your own energy of, well, they're bad and I'm good. Or do you know what I mean? Because I noticed when you were talking about that, you didn't go into, well, they're the enemy now. It's like, no, I'm just going to think like that. It's a different perspective altogether. It's being able to make the assumptions without being fixed about it, so that you can look from this. And it makes me think, like you were saying, okay, yeah, book needs to be written. We need to write a game, have podcasts on it, but also like an app of training the brain to look at assumptions. What is this assumption, and what is this leading me to? What is this assumption? What is this leading me to? I know there's a lot of concepts around the possibility thinking. I homeschool my boys, and we think about, okay, what else is possible? What else is possible? Because there's one thinking, well, he did this and that's what happened. It's like, well, what else is possible? But looking at this with the assumption as well, and not being so attached or defining yourself by it, is very interesting. I like this idea of how you shifted in the put things in a box, but didn't allow the monster to own you or to take control of you. And that analogy right there is, and there's so many takeaways, but that analogy right there is a really good one for a lot of us to get right now. Because I don't know how it is for you in Germany there, but in America, most people are in fear. That is fear. It's like fear porn, we call it now, right? Because it's just like an addictive fear mongering, but it's like, okay, well, let's assume we're in quarantine for the next 30 days. What are the possibilities here? What do we need to do? Instead of, the fight or flight and going into freak out mode and nothing gets done and we become zombies of, okay, we'll follow the leader because they know better. It's like, no, we still have to lead ourselves. We still have to make decisions, and it would be best if we could make decisions based on a clear view and being able to assume different possibilities. What's your take?
Well, and I think and unfortunately it's a negative word, but the ability to disassociate is really handy. So it's like, Myers-Briggs, MBTI? And so what are you, by the way?
Myers-Briggs.
Can you remember yours?
INFP? INFP, I think. INFP. Yeah.
So, and I am an ENTP. ENTP? That's plausible. Yep. So definitely gigantic on the T, feeling. If I know what feelings are, I can process it and I can do experiments and put it down into bullet points. Whereas I think a lot of the feely people are really struggling right now because they're sort of feeling everything because the news has got a big number and tomorrow it's a bigger number. And you hear a story of somebody suffering and you feel the suffering too. So I feel for the feelers because they're going to have a really tough time with this because they're constantly like emoting stuff all the time. On the thinking side, it's like, well, right now, if particularly, and I try to do this in the MBA program as well, just exercises to have people, even if they're very feely people, come up with an exercise to allow them to give themselves permission to be a different person for about 5 minutes. So one exercise that I have quite often in developing business plans is to say, well, okay, we've all agreed that we're going to do this. Good, fine, we've got an easy plan. Now, let's come up with a crazy plan that we will never do, just for fun. And so because the sensible people have said, okay, well, at least we've all agreed the sensible thing, now I can play with the idea a little bit. And I know that if we do this, we'll come up with better solutions.
Yeah.
But if I keep the person in that mode of thinking, they can't. And at the moment, for example, there's a project that I'm working on, which will be the first immediate immunity treatment for like an immunity vaccination for the virus. So it uses antibodies from patients who've recovered. And so I'm working with scientists and medical researchers on this. And the insight that we have is that you can take blood plasma to treat sick patients. However, you can take blood plasma, extract the antibodies, and then give them to healthy people, such as doctors or nurses or police officers, etc., etc. as a short-term immunity from the disease for a couple of months. Well, this would be the first immunity, the brilliant thing. Well, in order to get this idea out, I worked with a few experts who are immunologists, virologists, and I had to, because this isn't my I can speed learn things very quickly, but this is clearly not my area. What I had is exercises for them to take themselves out of themselves after they share themselves. Fine, we've got that. You've got 5 minutes. Let's just be a little bit creative. And then all of a sudden, new things go ding, 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 ding. I know that this is how their brains work, even if I've never met them before, because I can work out who kind of a person is relatively quickly. And I know that these people, I can give them a little challenge, and they'll just beetle off and they'll fix it. It's brilliant. So this type of thinking approach to disassociate and disconnect from, let's say, you think is real, even if you need to treat it as game for a few minutes, because the problem of being the super positive person is that you'll be wrong sometimes. No, I don't like being wrong. I mean, it's okay being wrong, but I mean, I'd rather be right than wrong. So for me, I consider these things as I don't have one way of handling stuff.
Yeah. But I like this idea.
If you've been programmed, like I'm this positive. I'm positive. I'm always then you snap, and you'll be perfectly fine for 6 years, and then you just get crazy.
Yeah. Well, as far as disassociating, I mean, but you'd have to look at it from every perspective, positive or not. You can disassociate, or I like to use separation, separating yourself out from the emotions, separating out from the identity of what that means, that you're positive or you're negative. You know, as a parent, there's different hats that I have to wear versus being, you know, working with my clients and speaking to someone. So separating myself out from the identity of, oh my gosh, I made a mistake. Oh, that's so embarrassing, or whatever. Or, that mistake cost lives. I mean, God forbid, right? So I get that disassociation, but I also like personal responsibility, that we take responsibility for our thoughts as well as our actions. You know what I mean? And
but. Well, and I mean, I'm just thinking. So when I helped the Syrian revolutionary people, I was in a London hotel meeting this guy from the Syrian opposition in London. We were on a Skype. We were listening to his friends in Skype, getting machine gunned down on the streets. So you're crying as this is happening, but if your job is to fix stuff, you can't. I mean, you need emotion to do these things. Otherwise, you just help nobody. But then you've got to come up with a plan. Okay, come up with a plan. So I think sort of unfeeling plans aren't helpful, because then you'll miss out some obvious stuff. But making plans out of feelings isn't particularly good either. It'll be like whatever. The president that has taken a clinical trial that took 14 days to do, where 42 patients were on it, 6 of them died or went off this. This is the hydroxychloroquine. I've just been studying that thing. It's a terrible study. It's phenomenal how delusional people have got because one person saw an artist or a news story. So those can be examples of, let's say, sort of. I mean, this is, let's say, the responsibility of leaders, personal responsibility. Because some people will be leading their whatever, like I'm reminded of World War I. They were just leading their soldiers into certain death. Now, it's fine if you're at the front of the crew and you take individual personal accountability and you can get shot too. But normally they weren't. They were like sitting drinking sherry.
Yeah. Okay. We could go on. Okay. So I would love to get your book recommendations. Clearly, you read a lot. I would say top 1, but I'm going to ask you for top 3 book recommendations.
So I'll go for one is The Perfect Swarm. So The Perfect Swarm is probably the best simple book on complex systems, just to understand how complex the world is. That's one. Then I would do Connected. Connected shows how the world works in networks. So network thinking is a really handy way of doing scaling. And then the third, I will choose Irrationality by Stuart Sutherland. So now, an American book will typically take a theme and then pad it out with 200 pages of case studies. This book is 400 pages, where every 2 pages is an American book. So it's very dense, but it's a brilliant read on behavioral science, what is known, not known. You can get, let's say, a skinny version by reading these sort of Daniel Aurelia books and other ones, but Irrationality is my favorite then because it's a nice, really dense, 300-page, serious read.
Excellent.
And they will give you part of the tools to build. I mean, these are some of the books that I use myself to create my new lens.
Excellent. Thank you. I really appreciate your time, and I would love to keep talking because it's just fun to talk to you. I'm gonna wrap this up, but I would love to. I'm gonna share on the podcast details your email. I mean your web address. Is that appropriate? Is that okay with you?
Yeah, the markturrell.com is fine.
Yep. Okay. And then is there anything else you would like to leave us with or share as far as how to get in touch with you or what your next project is?
So in my website's at www.markturrell.com. The next things that I'm working on, so the bigger thing that I was working on before this virus thing came out was how do you teach 21st century soft skills? So critical thinking, complex problem solving, creativity. How do you teach that at mass scale to kids, adults, and corporates? So that's what I'm currently been working on. So making courses, like how do you speed learn? How do you do Google searches properly? So that's one big project that I have. And I think this ability to remake the education systems has become dramatically easier because of the shutdown. Because now because people are being forced to change education. So that's quite handy. The other things that I'm working on at the moment, I have something called Corona Nation, which is a Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn group for people that have had corona. Either they're still sick and recovering, people have recovered and sharing their stories, companies as well with sick employees, but also those people that are concerned citizens. So Corona Nation is on a Facebook group, and that's fascinating hearing what's going on. I've got some of these healthcare projects that I'm on, but at the moment what I'm quite enjoying is working out what happens next. And at the moment, there is an opportunity, like in order to, if you're trying to change a system from here to tip it here, it needs to be destabilized first. So at the moment, our world is destabilized. It was destabilizing anyway, but now it's basically unfortunately, just because it's destabilized doesn't mean to say it'll be better. And what I think is fascinating is the total absence in the public arena about any form of oversight into anything that's going on anywhere. The way that whatever money is just going to be dished out left, right, and center. There's all the people that were doing climate change and like really push, where were them saying that the 500 billion going into US companies should have green strings attached, or you can't get the money? Because now is the perfect time, because if somebody is in pain, pull them. It would make sense. Mm-hmm. And I also see in looking at Europe and around the world that this is an opportunity for more and more draconian, authoritarian, anti-privacy, anti-human rights rules to be put in place. And historically, they don't get removed afterwards.
Right.
So I see that because we don't have a political arena anymore, there's only one topic, which is the virus. And if you say anything against what's been doing, you'll be shouted at. Mm-hmm. I think right now, instead of hopefully, I mean, this is probably going to last for about 2 years, 2.5 years at least. The only way that we can fight the virus is to be immune. And our chosen way of fighting the virus is to close down economic and social activity, because we don't have another tool until we are immune. What it means is that the virus will come back, and we'll closed, open, and it won't stop for 2 years. So I think then at least, because it'll last longer than a few weeks, it's more likely to be months and months. It does mean that gradually the narrative of positive change can come out. But I can see at the moment people in America are just about to experience shock or are just experiencing shock. but they haven't thought through what shock looks like. Shock will look like for many Americans, sadly. So 30% of Americans have zero savings. Zero. So they can't survive a week or 2 weeks without the bi-weekly paycheck coming in. And so even if you're forgiven for your rent for up to 3 months in some European places, you still owe the rent. So many people, when they finally emerge and it's spring and they're covered in their marsh like this, they realize that they don't have a job. They now owe 3 months worth of rent. They have no income coming in. So I think a lot of people will be really, really, really struggling. And I mean, it would be nice to be the optimist. I think I'm quite optimistic in general. I know that my glass right now is completely full. Why is it completely full? It's full of air. Uh-huh.
Yeah, perspective, yeah.
So getting this perspective right, I mean, but I think many people will genuinely really, really struggle. And one of our society choices right now is saying, just how do we handle this? And at the moment, it's too early to tell because people haven't hit shock yet. I think America is just getting there, but it's just going to keep going for a good couple of months. And when people realize they don't have income, and companies, it's brutal, absolutely brutal.
Yes.
But with that, you can make different things because then it means that we can't go on consuming as many things as we can, borrowing money left, right, and center.
Right.
Buying products don't need to impress people that don't care, but with money you don't have anyway.
Right.
Different life.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So I'm going to say thank you so much. And I cannot believe we just went over an hour. And I could definitely speak to you again and more. And I hope that you will come on again. I would love to stay in touch with you. And I know our listeners would absolutely be interested in knowing going forth. The Corona Nation, I'm definitely going to check that out. So I'll post that below as well and let everyone know about that. Thank you so much, Mark. I greatly appreciate your time. And it was so nice to see hear your birds in the background and see your beautiful environment there. Thank you. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you very much. And I already say yes for doing anything else.
Fantastic. You're awesome. You're completely awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much. And I will say that's the end of the podcast.